issues. Okay. So, hi, Eric. Good to see you. Okay, so here's the idea. Let me open with this here, and let me share here. There. So with the same idea that we did last time, we're going to address a next challenge, a next open question on biodiversity loss and deforestation in a similar way that we did last time with respect to climate change and energy. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go over quickly the Padlets that you worked on last time and that others who couldn't come to class were able to see there. And I only want to comment briefly on each of them so that it can give you an idea of what is there and what is missing and how can we learn from those, so that in the exercise in groups today, we again do the same thing. It is basically the same type of 6 tasks for 6 groups here, but this time with the particular challenge of applying these tools of the course to the problem of biodiversity loss with a particular focus on deforestation, which is, by the way, something that many of you are working on your essays, on your final grades. So we will do that. I will review the Padlet and with you by showing you here in the screen, and then we will get to work on the biodiversity loss issue. And by that, I will again make a brief introduction to you guys about the problem situation in general, and then you will go to work in the groups. You will fill a new set of Padlets, and those will remain there, and then that will allow us to take a look at what is happening there. Before I start, let me quickly ask you in a poll 2 things that I want to know how many of you have already checked. So let me ask you these 2 quick things about the guidelines for the final paper and about the quizzes that you already saw, the 3 quizzes. So let me poll you on that quickly. There are 17 of you here, so yeah. So I have 14 answers already, 15. I'm missing 2 more. So 2 more people. So please, those of you who haven't seen the guidelines for the term paper, they are in Moodle, but I want you to take a look at that. And they are just a little bit more detailed from what is in the syllabus of the course. I haven't changed that. I just expanded on that. And what's the idea for this final paper? And in terms of the quizzes, also, those of you who haven't checked, please check your quizzes grades, because next week, which is our last week, I am going to run one last quiz. And since I am going to drop the worst of your 4 quiz grades, you may want to look at your grades to see how well prepared you can get to that. And so I want just to make sure that that is happening. Somebody just came in, but I didn't check who was that, but please try to fill the poll that we are right now opening. So let's see. And yep, I think I have everyone by now. Maybe one more one more of you is missing for answering the poll. Okay, now I have them all. Great. So thank you for that. So it's like 44% of you haven't checked your quiz grades and 44% of you haven't checked the guidelines of the term paper. So please do so, and we'll work on that. So let me get to the point of the Padlets last time, and I am going to do it the following way. Let me share here. So if you remember, this is what we were doing last time. These were the challenges. Maybe I can expand this and then you can just use this here. Yeah, I think it's better this way. So you have the groups in the right, how they were randomly assigned, and those were the people participating in these 6 tasks or 6 groups. And we're going to be doing something similar, but again, we are going to reshuffle the groups and the assignments to the tasks. So you will be working with different people and probably with a different of these group tasks. So in last time, the idea for group A was to see how this notion of an empty or a full planet would apply to the problem of climate change and energy, and how this metaphor of the Earth spaceship would apply to the particular case of energy use and climate change. And there was a Padlet that this group A did, Eric, Joseph, and Robert, and I'm going to share that quickly in, where is it? And here. So let me go to Padlet A. This is that. And in each of the Padlets, I inserted a box here in a different color that you can see there. You're seeing the Padlet in your screens, right? Are you? Yeah? Okay. So in this group, the participants already inserted this idea of the full world and the empty world. And what I was annotating there is that I think that the concept was well understood and applied. Probably a key detail is to understand that both, because of energy production and energy use, there are impacts in the inputs from the biosphere towards the box of the economy, and then outputs from the box of the economy towards the biosphere that will begin to make the economy box grow and grow towards filling the biosphere. And maybe I would like to see a little bit more specifics on how is that happening. So probably in this particular box, there are a couple details on that, on how the human energy or the human-based energy and the different sourced energy from different places, but also energy produced from some processes, are also degrading because of the extraction, but also because of the outputs. So a little bit more of that would allow the analysis to be more specific to climate change and to energy use. Now, it's not only about energy, but it's also the connection between energy use, which is what is producing the problem with the spaceship Earth being filled up. Because most of the problems are regarding the burning of fossil fuels, who are emitting the CO2 emissions, and these CO2 emissions are filling up in the atmosphere and creating the climate change. So this is the type of details that are good, that can be clarified in that sense. Now, let's go to group B quickly. So if we go to group B here, in group B, we had Connor and Harrison and Jared, and you were asked to use the game theory approach using a simple payoffs matrix and illustrate with an example that would involve the problem of climate change and energy use. So if we go to that Padlet, so let's go to Padlet B here, and evidently by putting here the matrix, it would be useful, because that way, if I amplify here a little bit, Here you could see, and this is based probably on one of the papers and the essays that you have been working, that depending on working with electric vehicles or gas vehicles, as you can see there in the matrices, then you can get into that particular detail. What I was annotating here, I think that's good. That's the idea. Two comments that I had there is that I was missing a little bit more of why the action of one player is affecting the well-being of the other player. That I am missing still in the analysis. If it is about using an electric car or a gas-based car, how is it that a person who decides to buy an electric car is affecting the well-being of the other player, whether the other player uses an electric car or a gas car? So that's the interdependence that I am annotating here, that I think it's important, that word that I'm highlighting there. And the other part that I was missing is, I think you have identified the possible players, but in some of the other boxes, like these other boxes, it is not clear if the game that you were thinking, the three of you, it was about the car manufacturers or the car users. You see what I mean? The game could be placed between car users or car manufacturers, or one car user and one car manufacturer. That would be an entirely different game. But what I'm inviting you for this time today in the new problem is that you specify which are the exact players, just basically the two players and the two actions that you're thinking to apply to the problem, and in the way that each player affects the well-being of the other player, think specifically of one particular example. There are many possible here, but think of particular examples. Here in this group B, you guys, I think, gave some interesting inputs on how to put that to connect, but in different versions. And the idea of to do it in group is brainstorm the idea, get it together, and try to put in the Padlet your final sort of decision or answer in that regard. Okay, so those were the comments that I was placing there for like feedback for you guys. Let's go back to group C. Here in group C, the idea was to go and see this idea of the inert human model, a different rationality opposed to the Homo economicus model. How would that apply to the problem of climate change and energy? So if I go to your Padlet, which is here, and with that idea that you copied the graph here for this human who is embedded in the biosphere and in a social cultural context, I could see that you were interpreting correctly the critique to the Homo economicus and the new features of this inert human, which is an inert human that is aware of its surroundings and its cultural context and the societal context in which the human is immersed, and how the human affects the context and how the context affects back the human. I think that all is clear there. What I was missing here, and this is what I was annotating, is that the direct and more concrete examples on how energy use and how climate change are excuses or situations in which this inert human is interacting with its surroundings. So more specific mentions to why the energy problem or the climate change problem is relating to that. Okay, so that was the other comment that I had here for this particular group. Let's go to group D. So group D here, you were expected to make a discussion about the ethical dimensions and the justice and distributive dimensions associated with climate change and energy use, including Pareto and the Rawlsian or veil of ignorance argument. And what I found in the Padlet, I think was useful. There's mentioning to the Pareto criteria and how citizens and energy companies would have certain strategies that would affect the others. That's for example, this particular box. I think that is useful for understanding the game theory approach. But then the question is, a lot about what is in this particular box, which I think referred clearly about the challenges. It is not only about how efficient has to be this idea of energy production and the consequences of energy production, but also how fair that allocation is. And you were trying to do that here in a discussion in opening the questions of what is more fair regarding the energy companies or the citizens. I think that was interesting there. In applying that to the case of justice from a Rawlsian discussion, I saw here in this box that I am moving here, the key elements. What I was missing is applying them to the particular problem of energy and climate change. So that would be an extra step needed. And for those of you who are going to be working in Group D today, and you have to deal with the justice issues and the distributional issues, I'm just inviting you to apply it more specifically to the problem that you are trying to understand here. Here in this box, there were some things that along with this box, even if I put this here even closer, maybe it's more clear. This one and this one down here, these two boxes here in the bottom right, they are both applying concepts of the game theory, which are useful, but then comes the next step, which is discuss the ethical dimensions. So fairness and justice and equity and Pareto criteria apply to that. So that's what I was annotating here in my green note. Okay, now let's go back to Group E. In Group E, we have here the application of the model of externalities, the one that you use, for example, for the second essay. And in that particular group, let me go here. And what I saw here is that you have clear how the notion works of who creates the externality and who suffers the externality. And then by looking at the negative externality associated with carbon emissions from the use of cars, I think you had a general idea of how to apply that with that model of externalities. I am expecting or assuming that you had the graphical model in your mind, that you would be able to see how it would apply to the problem of energy use and the problem of climate change. So it could be the way that in this graph, there is a level of production of whatever economic production it is that produces emissions, and those emissions accumulate in the atmosphere, and those emissions in the atmosphere affect later on or immediately or at some point some other people who didn't participate in the economic production or didn't benefit from the economic production in that sense. So what I was annotating here in your Padlet for that purpose is that you have that clear, but I am still missing how specifically climate change is affecting the victims of the externalities. One example that I was giving you a week ago was in this little island in the northern part in the Caribbean in Colombia, where a hurricane just wiped out the island, and these islanders did not participate at all in the benefits that created the economic activity that induced the climate change that increased the probability of this type of hurricanes. That would be a clear case of an externality. So that was one of the annotations here where you could try to apply that to the particular case of energy and climate change. And finally, last but not least, Group F was expected to apply this model of bargaining that we had, if you remember, regarding the company that employs all these people from this city, and these are citizens and or employees or workers, and they have this bargaining process in which they need to decide whether to leave or not, and whether to increase the environmental quality or whether to increase wages. And what I saw here from that particular group is that I see here just one annotation, one box in which the group was trying to compile the three participants here. In this case, it was Jesse, Catherine, and Michelle, how the climate change problem is addressing the excess use of fossil fuels by this company, which I think is a fair, good representation of that. In that sense, I was annotating there in green that the setup is clear. And I would like to see a little bit more on how that energy used by the company ends up making or affecting the decisions by both the company and the citizens. Because notice, one thing is air pollution, which is the problem that we saw in the Brownsville model. It is the company's emissions that affect the quality of air. And that's fair, that's fine. We have done that. But in the case of climate change and energy use, it's different because now the aggregate of the emissions by this company and many other companies are aggravating the climate change at the planetary level. So there are victims outside of the town, outside of the city. And I wanted you to think about that, because this is a particular company with a particular set of citizens, but in the terms of energy and climate change, there are more victims outside of that domain, right? As opposed to the pollution of that particular town. So if you remember the real world case of the Taranto city in Italy, that we saw this huge mega industrial complex for this steel factory, whose emissions are affecting the quality of life of the people living in Taranto. Well, probably you guys in New England or myself here in Colombia are not being harmed at all by those toxic emissions by that plant in Italy. But that particular company, if it is producing fossil fuel-based emissions that produce CO2 to the atmosphere, well, there might be some small fraction of those emissions who are contributing to climate change as a whole, and that would eventually be affecting you and me and many other people around the world. So that would be the difference for the case of climate change and energy. So that was my annotation in that case. So that's a quick review of what I was evaluating in those Padlets, so that you could take a look. You can open the Padlets actually, and with that you can take a look back now that we're going to start working on this new case. And what I did here, let me share now my Moodle screen. What I did is the following. In Moodle, what you now see, I reorganized a few tabs here and there. So now what we have is the following. This is our part 5 here, which is the great challenges and possible solutions, which is where we are at right now. Now we are past these group tasks that we did last time. So you have there this, for example, which is the group tasks that I showed you in the screen, and then the Padlets for the 6 groups. Okay, so I am going to close that, and now there's a new tab there, a new section there, which is for today. So you will see there the group tasks, and I'm going to refer to them in a second, and the links for the 6 Padlets. So once you know which group you were assigned to by Zoom, you will go to that Padlet and work on that Padlet, but you will be sent to by Zoom in the breakout rooms to that. Okay, so that's the idea for the new Padlets. Those are new links. You are going to use again the same password. Let me put the password here again. It's going to be ECON308 Spring. That's going to be the same password this time. And finally, let me get to the introduction to the problem of climate, to biodiversity in that sense. So here's where we are in our today's session. And the idea is the following. These are the 6 tasks or group tasks, which are the same, but in this case apply to biodiversity loss and deforestation. So again, group A is going to look at the metaphor assigned to the Balding spaceship Earth idea of the full planet or the empty planet, and this idea of the economy box embedded in the biosphere. We have seen many of those diagrams to give the concepts some relationship to the problem. And in this case, it's going to be the problem of biodiversity loss and deforestation. Group B is again going to use any application of a game theory approach to that in terms of applying a simple 2x2 matrix, identifying two players, how they interact with each other, how each one is affecting the other one, and in this case, with a particular mention to the challenge of solving the problem of biodiversity loss and deforestation. Group C is going to work again about the problem of the inert human model and how it would apply to that. Group D will discuss these ideas of the ethical dimensions, thinking about fairness, Pareto criteria, the Rawlsian perspective of the veil of ignorance, and the like. Group E is going to work on how the model of externalities would work out in that case, and Group F, how this model of bargaining between, in this case, it could be a company that is dedicated to logging or agribusiness, which is directly related to biodiversity loss and deforestation, and a community where this company operates. So that would be the reference in this case. So let me give you a quick overview of what the challenge is when we talk about biodiversity loss and deforestation. And I was digging some nice summary graphs that I found that I think are very telling of the story. So this one, and some of these were collected from this website, Our World in Data, which is a nice portal that conveys and compiles a lot of data sources from different parts of research. And this one I like because it relates to what has happened in the last thousands of years, if you remember our first part of the course, and pretty much before humans began to alter the face of the earth. More or less the estimation was that 29% of the earth was composed of land, and the other 71% was ocean. And then out of that, about 71% could be habitable land in the sense that it could be a place where humans could settle and exploit or live out of the resources. And there was probably this other 29% that were glaciers and barren land, which is basically inhabitable at the terms that we know for humans. Somewhere 10,000 years ago, this began to change. And this composition of land of about 57% of forests and 42% of grasslands and shrubs began to change. And then the forested land began to shrink a little bit, but very little if we compare to what has happened in the last few hundreds of years. So notice, from 10,000 to 5,000, over 5,000 years, there wasn't much change in terms of how much was forested land and how much was this grassland and shrubs. Then somewhere in the 1700s, humans, and you remember that from the first part of the course, began to expand and agriculture, and then all these lands that became grasslands that were for human purposes and cropland, which were also for human purposes, begin to grow. And then the forested land begins to shrink from 52 to 50 to 48, all the way to 38% of this land cover, 15% in terms of cropland, and 31% in grazing. And this grazing is mostly associated to pastures for cattle raising, okay? And it remained this other part of land, which is basically these wild grasslands and shrubs that are not human based, or at least not used for direct human extraction or consumption. Okay, and also there is a little part here of 1% of land in cities, in urban settlements. So that's an overview of how over this period of time you can see how over many hundreds and thousands of years not much was changed, but over the last 200 years what we have been calling the capitalist revolution is where this transformation has been happening. If we look at that today, that varies a lot from region to region around the world. So this graph, this map shows the change in forest land at around 2015, when they could estimate this in terms of net change of forested areas. So the redder the area, the higher the loss of forest land. The greener the area, the higher the recovery of forested land. So you can see here that, for example, China and India are actually recovering. All this part in the northern part of Asia, North Asia, which involves a lot of Russia and former Eastern Soviet Union countries. A lot of Europe is recovering back. You can see a lot of greens there. And in yellow is where you don't see major changes, positive or negative. But if you see the tropical forests, which are the richest in biodiversity, and this is the point that I want to take here, a lot of Central America and South America, a lot of these tropical forested areas of Africa, and a lot of these tropical forested areas in South Asia and Indonesia and the like, are the ones having the highest rates of negative change, meaning loss of area. So this is also important to think about the problem of biodiversity loss, again, because these tropical regions, all these lands here that I'm going to put in this blue, all this part of the world is where most of the biodiversity exists today. By that I mean the variety of species of plants, animals, microorganisms in the soils, in the water, that are being threatened by this particular loss of forested around the world. So that gives you also to a qualification of how this is happening around the world in general. Looking at particular countries, you can see also some interesting patterns. So look at this here. And I just chose some countries that are showing positive changes. So if, for example, if you look at England, 1,000 years ago had 20% of forested land, and they went all the way to somewhere about in the late 1700s, all the way down to probably 5% of forest. So they cut a lot of forest. And then some decisions, particularly in Scotland, more than in England, you can see the recovery of forest in Scotland. And now Scotland is all the way back to where it was 1,000 years ago, or pretty close. England has recovered some, and England is here at around 10%. Look at France. France apparently was somewhere 1,000 years ago about almost 50% forest, and they basically hammered their forest down really hard here. There was some recovery here that I'm not sure the exact reason for France, then down again. This is the entire industrial revolution around here, but somewhere in the late 1800s, their forests began to recover back, and notice by 2020, it would be estimated that France forests are back to somewhere around 30% of their area. United States, it used to be somewhere about 45% or more. It depleted that according to this data. And then you don't see much positive change over the 20th century or the start of this new century here. A little bit of improvement there. And I wanted to talk about biodiverse countries, and I wanted to give you 3 examples. Costa Rica, which has done a very interesting work in eliminating extractive industries and activities in its country, even by constitution. So Costa Rica today eliminated the extraction of fossil fuels entirely from its surface, entirely. And they have devoted a lot of effort to recover back forests and to put a lot of effort into nature-based tourism as a source of revenues and employment and growth. And they have been recovering a little bit of that, of what they lost. But notice, all these countries were somewhere between 60 and 70% of their land being forested because they are in the tropical regions, right? So you can see Brazil, how fast it has depleted in so few years, how fast it has depleted its forested area from 70% to 60% in very few years. That's how steep it is. And Colombia, same thing, with less forested area, but still close to 60% and going down and getting close to 50%. So these are just stories of that. If we look in general to biodiversity, and I am going to use here a new methodology that is catching some attention around, is what is called the Living Planet Database. This is the World Wildlife Fund who has been compiling this information. And basically what they have done is that they have data sets for 27,000 different populations of mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians around the world. And based on that, on the populations of each of those species reported by biologists, they are calculating with a baseline in the 1970s, when they began to have reliable data of how much each of these populations for each of these species have been going down or up, all the way from certain rhinos and elephants down to particular frogs or snakes or reptiles, you name it. And they calculate an index for the entire world, which has been going down. But as you can see here, the rate of depletion of that biodiversity is much faster for Latin America and the Caribbean. And it has been less for the case of Europe and Central Asia and the other regions in the world somewhere in between, including North America or the US there. So this gives you an idea of the variability around the world of what happens in terms of biodiversity losses. So I want to go back to this diagram that we have seen several times in the class. And I want you to think now in economic terms, in the following sense. In the particular case of using biodiversity for the economic functioning. So if you think of the economy here, taking from nature for the production of firms and the consumption of households, certain land, raw materials, and energy and water. But also because of the production and because of the consumption, some pollution waste going back to nature. How would you see these particularly related to the problem of deforestation, right? So for example, deforestation involves logging firms who need timber to produce furniture, and they extract timber from the land. So they deplete and deforest, clear forests to get that timber. Households need to get food. They need to get raw materials for building their houses. But also in that process of production and consumption, they send pollution back to nature. And that pollution back, that waste, is affecting also the state of biodiversity. I have already mentioned why this coronavirus, who is cornering the entire humankind today, still today, was the result of the growing activity of consumption and production that began to pressure over the natural areas where these pathogens were already existing, who knows for how many, even thousands of years. But they were okay there. But once humans begin to get in more contact with nature, it is easier that, for example, human beings consume animals, wildlife, or approach wildlife or preserve ecosystems, and then these diseases jump from those ecosystems to humans and affect human health. And that's exactly what we are seeing today. And I had mentioned that before, scientists have recognized already today at least 120 to 160 pathogens that are today inhabiting animals in the forested areas that could get in contact with humans and could affect human health in a similar way to what we are seeing today with this particular COVID-19. So that's a general framework for that. And then if we get into more details, I wanted to bring this particular diagram here from the Dasgupta report that was issued very recently, in which it explains how these ecosystems, from the genetic to the traits, to the communities, to the populations, to the functions, to the structures of all these ecosystems, right? To the tiniest little microorganisms, all the way to certain individuals of animals or plants, to populations of them, and then the ecosystems that host these interactions between all these elements, create what we call this natural capital. And this natural capital is also interacting with some abiotic components, chemical and physical parts of the environment. So for example, metals, gases, and the like. And these ecosystems end up affecting the productivity and the ecosystem resilience, which will support the capacity of the natural capital to support the economy. And experts on this sense, they call these the major functions that sometimes they classify into three major types. Provisioning services, which would be, for example, providing raw materials for the industry or food or energy sources for human and firms' consumption. Regulating and maintenance services, which is how the ecosystems regulate temperatures, they regulate cycles, they regulate water, all the way to cultural services or intangible services, which would include, for example, components that are essential to cultures to have spiritual and religious practices, because there are certain species that are sacred or are relevant for the functioning of certain cultures, all the way to simply speaking about mental health and the fact that humans enjoy and benefit just from existing wild areas in which people can go trekking, climbing, walking, sightseeing. All of those are cultural services, not because we extract something from that landscape or because that landscape is regulating or maintaining some of these functions or we are getting out of that materially, but it provides cultural services to us. And here are just a bunch of different examples that you could, and these are just a short list of many examples of things that this natural capital provides for the economy to function, okay? And lastly, I want to then summarize this in the following way to go back to our tools in the course, and then I will send you to the working groups. And the idea is the following. Because of the loss of biodiversity and because of deforestation, human beings can, through their actions, affect the well-being of others in at least two general categories. The first one, which we have called the intergenerational equity and the intergenerational externalities. That means that the more species we lose today and the more ecosystem functions we lose today because of biodiversity loss and these deforestation processes, the less possibility future generations will find to be serviced or to be benefited by the ecosystem services that we have been mentioning. So new generations are going to be harmed by this because they will have less opportunities. So imagine that in one of these species that hasn't been discovered yet, or the genetic composition of that particular species that hasn't been studied enough yet today, if we lose the species, we may be losing the possibility that future generations find a cure to cancer, right? or a cure to certain other diseases that we haven't found solutions to. But also, second category here is the intragenerational externalities, that meaning that current generations' actions are affecting today's benefits to others in terms of those provision, maintenance, regulation, or cultural services. And let me give you just 4 quick examples of those externalities. You clear forests, and some other people would be seeing their possibility of water, fresh water supply, deregulated or affected or decreased, because forests help in the regulation of the water supply, for example, between the dry season and the wet season, to give you an example. Another example, forests can provide, and plants in particular can provide, ways of creating pest and disease control by containing pathogens that affect crops or human health. So if we lose forests, then people are going to be suffering more these consequences of pests and diseases. One more, forests are very good at purifying water because they regulate the cycle of water, and in that process, through the coverage of plants and the biophysical processes in the ground, they help purify water that contains certain contaminants. If we lose forests, we lose the capacity of people benefiting from water that has been purified. Or forests provide food, timber, fibers, seeds to other people. And if we clear forests, we are going to lose the possibility that those people are benefited from being able to extract from those forests their means for their livelihoods in terms of food or materials. So those are examples of how this may work in terms of biodiversity. And with those in hand, I am going now to create the breakout rooms for you to work. So we will have more or less 3 people in each group again. And this is going to be randomly done by Zoom. Then you will be assigned to group A, B, C, D, E, and F. And you already in Moodle know what the task is for each of those groups. And then you will have all the materials at your disposal there. One more piece of information is, remember, and let me go back to that and remind you of that. Remember here in the Moodle that if you go here to this brief summary of tools and approaches, you can get a lot of these basic concepts that we have been doing. This is like a summary of the entire course that I put there that you saw last time that you can use again today. So think of this as a cheat sheet that you can use to get ideas, concepts, diagrams that you can insert into the Padlet and create a narrative on how you are going to be addressing this. So you can see here again the group tasks with the questions and the 6 Padlet links, and you have the password to work on that. So the only thing remaining now is to create the groups and send you to the group, to the breakout rooms, and then you will start working on your Padlets from now until we finish class today. So we are going to be doing 6 groups assigned automatically. Let me go here to create the rooms. I'm going to rename the groups with room A, room B, room C. No, wait, this is room 3. Room 3 is room C. Room 4 is room D. Room 5 is group E, and finally group 6 is group F. There you go. And in options, I am going to not stop this at 5 minutes, which is what happened last time, that it automatically sent you back. So if I am correct here, you have been already assigned options, countdown after closing breakout rooms of 30 seconds. So that should be okay. And what I am going to be doing is to send you to the groups now, and you will be working on your Padlets. Is there any question at this point, or is it clear? Are you guys clearing what we're going to be doing? Yeah, okay, good. So go ahead and go to your rooms, and if you need me, I think there's a way of you calling me, and I will go to your room and see how things are going. But anyway, I will be going from room to make sure that you have your Padlet and all the input. So go ahead now and join your rooms for this. And let me stop the recording here. I don't think we need pause. So we're coming back, and I can see here a lot of interesting stuff in those Padlets. I will be looking at those later and make some annotations. So thank you for that. And since we are pretty much back here, except those from group E who left and left for good, they are going to miss the last announcement in the last 60 seconds that I have, and is the following. Alvin couldn't come on time to class because he was attending a ceremony in which he was awarded a scholarship. So I want you to go to the bottom of the reactions and click the applause button and congratulate Alvin for that. So great, congratulations, Alvin, for that. Very glad to hear that I have students who get recognized, and congratulations for that, seriously. Great. Okay, guys, so we have those Padlets. From what I was watching while you were typing in, let me just say that I think that the exercise is going better and better from last time to this one. And hopefully next time, next Tuesday, is going to be even better. And so we will be doing exactly the same thing, these 6 tasks for the different groups. And this time we're going to be working on issues of the oceans or the pandemics. And I don't know which one is going to go first on Tuesday or Thursday, but I think those are 2 interesting areas in which we can apply these things. So I will be organizing my thoughts and bringing those for you so that on Tuesday and Thursday we will be doing that. And on that Thursday, we will be doing the final quiz. So make sure you take a look at your grades in terms of quizzes. And that's all for today. So thank you guys for coming, and I'll see you next week. And I will be sending more stuff through the Moodle, okay? So good to see you, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Professor, I was just wondering if the SA2 grades were up yet. As well as
I have been uploading one at a time as I am finishing grading, and yours, Ian, let me see, I have the list here. I should have it for you this afternoon, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
With annotations and the grades. Yeah.
Sweet. Thank you.
Good to see you. Hey,
right,
your
boss.
lights in your room are so cool.
Thank you. Thank you. I just got them. You can change the colors on them.
Yeah, I was watching that. That's amazing. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
No, they're my favorite. I got them for Christmas. So
nice. Okay.
all right,
Good
boss.
to see you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.